Welcome to Real People, No Mask Required. You'll learn about real people facing real life experiences with your host, Liz Younger, licensed clinical social worker.
My name is Liz Younger, and I am a licensed clinical therapist here in the Lehigh Valley. I have been in the field since 1988, and I want to welcome you to Real People, No Mask Required. This is a webinar series about talking to real people about their authentic experiences with mental health. And it is my pleasure today to welcome State Representative Michael Schlossberg to the program. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Liz. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So should I call you State Rep?
No, Mike is fine. Mike is very fine. Yes.
So to begin with, you have been extremely honest about your interest and experiences with mental health. So I guess really what I'm going to start with, and it's not going to be the obvious way, is your interest. So if you could share about your interest related to mental health.
The interest kind of comes from two factors, and you can't separate the two. The first and the obvious one is personal. I've had some sort of depression or anxiety issue probably since I was a little kid, diagnosed since I was 18, so almost half of my life now, a little bit more. And that has unquestionably altered my life in both negative and positive ways. My official diagnosis is a major depressive disorder with a reoccurring generalized anxiety disorder. I take medication. I go in, see my therapist on more or less an as-needed basis. Fortunately, it's a chronic condition, but it's manageable and treatable and something I can live with. But that personal experience has informed the second aspect of my interest, which is that it impacts my constituents. I know that 1 in 5 people in this country actively suffer from some sort of mental illness, and that 1 in 2 will over the course of their lifetime. We know that suicides are approaching 30-year highs, and I'm deathly afraid to see what's going to happen with the suicide rate after this pandemic does finally, eventually abate. And those are two things that really drive my interest. And what I found is I can use my own story to destigmatize the issue, speak about the issue with credibility, and more importantly, try to inspire other people to get into the help they need and talk about their own challenges, because nobody should be ashamed or embarrassed about suffering from depression, anxiety, or any other mental illness.
So if I can ask, you mentioned about being on medication, and I'm not going to dig too deep here. How long have you been taking your medication?
Late December 2001. So since I was a freshman year of college. And I wish I'd realized at the time just how common that experience was, but freshman year of college is really when all my mental health issues really exploded. They came to head. New environment, no social group, none of my usual support groups, living away from home for the first time. That's when it all became unmanageable until I started the medication.
And so have you had any changes in your medication?
Yeah, I changed medication when I was younger until I found one that worked, which is anybody who's ever started mental health medication knows that can be a real challenge, finding one that not only does the job, but doesn't give you debilitating side effects. And once I found the right medication, it was wonderful. I have increased and decreased the dosage as needed. I've tried, this is just me, I've tried to get off of the medication, but found that I couldn't, I became too depressed and had too many trouble sleeping. So that was always a real challenge for me. I have a genetic predisposition to depression. I have it across both sides of my family, and for whatever reason, I got whacked with it. And that means I've made peace with the fact that I'm probably going to be on medication for the rest of my life, and I don't really care because it helps me function. It lets me live a good life, and it lets the therapy work. So if that's what it is, that's what it is.
So what are other strategies that you use to kind of maintain your stability, your mood?
I have always been kind of type A, and that's driven not only by anxiety, but by personal ambition. I discovered in high school and college that you could supplement. You could throw yourself into a million tasks and not only enjoy things, but kind of run ahead of it. Now, that's not a long-term strategy. That's not something that works forever, but it is a good way of coping. I will add that one of the things that has really helped my life is about 7 or 8 years ago, I really became a bit of a fitness nut, and going to the gym regularly and working out has been a lifesaver. It's funny, I would alternate between cardio and weights when I worked out. And then thanks to COVID, I started running because clearly the gym wasn't an option for a few months. And now I love running. This is great. So that's been a huge mood booster. On days where I don't exercise, I'm much more sour. Ask my wife.
One of the issues that I noted was on Friday, you had an article in the paper and you were laying out a plan with regards to address a task force and addressing suicide on a broader level.
Yep.
Part of my rationale for creating this series was based upon the same thought. I mean, I had seen that Walnut Creek in San Francisco, right before the Susan Wild roundtable, virtual roundtable, had posted 600% increase in suicide hotline calls.
Yeah.
And a year's worth of suicides completed in 30 days. And in my thoughts, if people could hear kind of somebody talking about the same issues they're facing or the same stories that they have, that might make them feel less isolated and more amenable to reaching out. With regard to your plan, I noted that there was one in particular part that I'd like to start with, which was the idea of training for the prevention of suicide and management of suicide risk across multiple sectors. And I'm just going to ask you to give me a little bit more detail about that.
Absolutely. So first, this plan, it's something that I worked on, and let me just make sure I clarify this. I was lucky enough to co-chair this task force, but this is something that was worked on with members of the governor's administration, the legislature, stakeholders, and public. This was a broadly produced plan that I was just lucky enough to be a part of. The training aspect in particular concentrates really on gatekeeper training, on people who interact with a lot of other people, especially at-risk people, and making sure that they're aware of the signs of suicide, how to refer somebody to help, and things like QPR training or mental health first aid. So in some cases it's formal, in other cases a little less formal. Like we passed a law a few years ago that gave teachers suicide training periodically. That's a great thing, but it needs to be expanded more into other people who interact with a lot of others on a regular basis. Police officers and other first responders are a great example.
So I did read at the beginning of the quarantine that they were going to provide mental health first aid to like supervisors within larger businesses and managers within those larger businesses as well. Is that a part of this plan?
I don't think that there's any. It calls for making training programs more available, but I don't think it's specifically targeted managers of larger businesses. No, not that I recall at least.
Okay. Yeah, that was just something I had read and thought, wow, that's really progressive.
Yeah, it's a great idea, and it's something each business should do, definitely.
Right. And with regards to the latest article, which was in Sundays, which is chronic traumatic encephalopathy, how does that possibly become a part of this? I know you have trauma-informed care, and I didn't know if it would be sort of under that piece.
That's probably where it would go. The state's made really large strides towards increasing trauma-informed care, especially in the education system. It's something that's particularly important in Allentown, where you have a huge degree of our students who have experienced some sort of trauma growing up, have pretty high ACEs scores. That's something that's particularly important here. But that is where I think that piece falls under, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I get the question a lot in my office, particularly when I get a traumatic brain injury. They'll have had a concussion due to a car accident or some other type of head injury accident. And they always get very anxious, like, will this lead to CTE? Anyway, with regards to your experiences within the mental health system, I guess, I know you've talked about being on medication and having a therapist, but can you kind of give, I guess, your first impression or your first decision to take this step and what that experience was like?
Which step? You mean talking about it or seeking help?
Seeking help.
So I was lucky in a variety of respects, and in that experience, it really informed my broader experience as well. I first saw a counselor for the first time in my life when I was 18 at Muhlenberg College, where I was a freshman. I was encouraged to go there by family, by friends, and by my girlfriend at the time, who were all very supportive. But I was lucky in that, one, I grew up in a culture that valued therapy, and I was surrounded by friends and family who encouraged me to seek therapy. And two, when I made that decision, I knew where to get help, and they had availability to see me. If any of those things had been different, I might not have gotten the help that I needed, and I don't know where I would have ended up from there. So that speaks to two things. One is the role and the importance of stigma. We need to continue to do everything we can to kind of beat back this notion, more prevalent in some places and some cultures than others, that seeking mental health help is a sign of weakness. Two, we have to make sure that that not only are the resources there, but people know how to access them. Again, I was a freshman at Muhlenberg. I was like 3 weeks into my freshman year when I made the decision to go see the counseling center there. But I knew where it was because the school did a really good job of advertising it. I got an appointment in a couple of days, and we were off to the races. That was almost 20 years ago. Oh God, almost 20 years ago now. I have gray here now. It's not, the demand has risen and the resources haven't risen at pace. So those challenges have only accelerated. And again, we have to, as a society, do a better job of investing in our mental health system if we're actually going to get there.
So when you had your first visit with a counselor, what did it match what you thought it would? Was it different? Were you intimidated? You know, many times when people like walk into my office for the first time, but number one, I see it as the strongest and bravest thing they can do. They have hope. They're walking through that door. That means they still believe that things can be different.
They want to do better. Yep.
So, well, better, be different. You see, that's just how I just make that distinction.
I understand.
But anyway, so with regards to that moment for you, how would you describe it?
From what I remember, it was a gentle beginning. It was a licensed social worker. I think he understood that it was my first time there, and he sort of laid out the groundwork, like, this is what we can do for you. This is how we can be helpful. But I do remember him, the one thing that I remember the most was the first time I kind of did small talk. He said, Mike, how can we help? And it was a pretty clear question. And that's what I remember the most. I remember starting to talk about my depression, my anxiety issues that I had at the time. But it was an easy beginning. That's the best way I could put it. The guy was trained enough to know, as I imagine most therapists are, to ease somebody into the idea of therapy and not, launch into, tell me your secrets. Like it was, and, over time and over multiple sessions, you build trust with that person and you kind of go from there.
Okay. I think people often have this real, as you've already pointed out, because of the stigma, because of, unfortunately, the portrayals in the media about what walking into a therapist is like. And, and so there's this whole trepidation, anxiety, just like walking in. And I think what you just described as this like gentle beginning, like nobody's just going to like pounce and be like, tell me everything.
Yeah.
I do have a tendency to want to let people know off the top, like, you have all the power. I'm just here to help you make some decisions, right? It's not up to me to tell you what to do, how to do it.
And that's a very important distinction too. My therapist never told me what to do. He never told me how to handle certain situations. He never told me how to handle my classwork. I remember once saying, can I get a note for this test I missed? He's like, no, I can't do that, which was appropriate. I didn't make the connection. In retrospect, that was totally appropriate. But he helped me sort my own head. And he helped me come to the decisions that were right for me. That's the best way I can describe those conversations.
No, and I don't believe this is your experience, but have you ever spent time in a hospital or any sort of facility?
I have not, no. Well, I was in an ER once for an anxiety attack when I was out of home, but that was the extent. That was one time in college in Philadelphia, and that was, here's a tranquilizer, goodbye, go see your therapist. And that was it. I had an anxiety attack while going for cheesesteaks with my fraternity brothers. It was and I haven't actually thought about that experience in years, because it's funny, at the time it was so embarrassing. It was terrifying. And they were so supportive. And I never forgot that experience.
Wow.
Wound up being one of the better. I had completely forgotten about it. But it's so funny to think about now.
Right. Yeah. And the gratitude you must still have that.
I remember buying donuts. Dozens of donuts I ran into my house with the next day.
Good for you.
I was very grateful.
And one of the things, and again, something I promote, is the idea that, many of the change makers in our country, our culture, they all had a diagnosis. So I have a tendency to look, for the most part, as mental health as you think differently. And therefore, it's kind of a superpower. because it makes you re-examine a situation from a different point of view.
It has given me, one, a degree of empathy, and two, a cause as a public official. It has become, there are two things I primarily talk about in my role as an elected official. One of them is education, especially representing the Allentown School District, third largest, third poorest, something I care deeply about. But the other is mental health, and it's probably the one that I'm better known for because of my personal experiences and because I've had more legislative success in that arena than others. But I wouldn't trade it. It's given me empathy. It's given me an understanding of human nature that I wouldn't have had it otherwise, and it's given me something to fight for. And it's also been a wonderful source of creativity for me. I've written countless blog entries. I have a three-book fiction series. The first book's out, two more still to come, that I've written that have given me immense joy, that deal largely with mental health, and it's something I've, for lack of a better term, I think I've used to try to enhance my life and hopefully the lives of others.
Nice. I did see, and I'm so sorry if it's like escaping me right now, you are now a part of an organization about changing the image of mental health. And I apologize if I can't think of what it's called.
No, there's a few groups that I do some of that work with. Yeah, definitely.
Can you just name the one, because you got recognized?
Is it the Ambassador for I'm the Evidence group?
That's it.
I mean, that's kind of an honorary, honestly, that's an honorary title. They were kind enough to do it. It was just for somebody who continues to fight for mental health related stuff and talks about it on a regular basis.
So I guess, Thursday, both you and I are winning an award for our work in suicide prevention. Mm-hmm. And so I guess I'm going to ask you to talk about, what you felt most proud about when you were told the news that you would be acknowledged for this.
I have tried constantly to use my own story and pivot it to the broader issue. One of the kindest things one of my colleagues ever said to me was, we had a conference, I think it was on the suicide prevention plan, and a rep looked at me and said, I really appreciate that you always talk about your own story, but you use it to pivot to the bigger issue. And that made me feel so good, because I don't want to talk about myself. This is about, I want to, but I want to talk about myself in the broader anti-stigma perspective, not me. Like, that's not, I want to discuss the issue. And so anytime I get an award, it brings additional awareness to the issue. And that's why I was very, very happy. And it's a local one. What happens in Northampton County affects my community and my life. So that gave it a little bit of an extra kick.
One of the articles that I just read yesterday, I'm happy to forward to you, talks about the use of self in therapy. And it actually is a little controversial, because as a therapist, you're kind of taught, like, don't disclose. Mm-hmm. But according to this article, it states, if you don't disclose, then you continue the stigma against mental health.
That's interesting.
Don't you think? So yeah. I send you that. I thought it was very interesting, and I read it yesterday while I was driving back from Lake Placid, and I thought, wow, there's such a struggle in this area, but it says by not disclosing, you basically keep the stigma.
That is interesting. And I've seen an array of therapists over the course of my life. I'm lucky I've had one for about 10 years now, but I've always been struck by the varying degrees to which they talk about themselves on a personal level, because it's very, very different in how they bring in their own personal stories. And every therapist I spoke with seems to have a different perspective. And hey, whatever works for you guys works for me. Whatever keeps you guys happy and going and keeps us then happy and going as well.
And I guess here's the other. This is going to seem like out of left field, but many times when I've got patients in my office, they'll leave laughing, and then I'll hear people say, like, "Is this really therapy?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." Because therapy is not about, a Barbara Walters interview where you're just like peeling the onion and waiting for the tears to come rushing forth. It is about having an open conversation without judgment and being able to ask yourself questions that maybe you didn't think of.
Right. Absolutely. And again, all that matters is that a therapist style matches the patient. Like, that's,
the chemistry, yes.
Yeah. I've never left. Well, no, that's not true. I've had some very interesting conversations with my therapist, including ones that veer into politics. Given my line of work, I suspect I'd have a hard time seeing a therapist who disagreed with me on political issues, and so far so good, thankfully. But that's, again, it's got to, whatever works.
Well, I do have a variety of political views in my office, and I always entertain each perspective because I feel it just informs me.
Absolutely.
Give you that
Absolutely.
broader, So I'm not like checking people as they walk in and saying, "Excuse me, what are your politics?" I
No,
mean,
that'd be really awkward. No, but and I think for the average normal human being, that doesn't necessarily have to apply. But given that my life is politics, I feel like I'd be really uncomfortable with a therapist who was a hardcore conservative. I don't think that would work for me.
no, you're right. You're right. Just
Yeah.
chemistry is everything, and
Yep.
actually, there are stats out there saying that, like, if you don't have good chemistry, and I mean, honestly, I encourage people all the time. If the chemistry's not good, go find something that will work.
Yeah.
End of story, right?
I've always got. One of my colleagues, I'll never forget, put on Facebook. She's an African American woman. She said, "I'm looking for an African American female therapist," and that really got me thinking about that issue and what a challenge that must be for therapists in particular. Now, I've always kind of gotten it. Always made me smile. My therapist of the past 10 years or so, who I love and who has helped me immeasurably, is a Venezuelan actually a Venezuelan refugee, technically. Or I don't know if it would be a refugee or an immigrant, but he certainly fled the country. And that's always kind of been an interesting perspective for me, because I can't imagine how difficult it would be as a white man to, if I was a therapist, to have a conversation with a woman about struggles that a woman faces, or a conversation with an African American or Hispanic person about the racism they face, because I could never match that experience. And I imagine that must really be a challenge for therapists in general and for patients.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you. It is an issue that continues to raise its head, and I'm not saying without merit. It definitely, some people do believe you have to walk the walk, to talk the talk.
Yeah, but that also, in a sense, that also doesn't, like, it's not like you could experience everything that a patient has ever experienced. So I've always found that to be a particularly interesting tension within the mental health universe. I will say that. But again, I always laugh. I mean, if anybody were ever to say to me, who's the most important racial minority in your life, there's an easy answer. That would be my therapist.
So, as we kind of wind down a little bit here, because it only goes so long. Anyway, one of the things, I guess, is when the pandemic and the quarantine first hit, like, what was your reaction? What was your family's reaction? Like, how was the response? I don't know if you have children. Did you say?
I do. I have a 9 and a 7-year-old.
Okay.
And they were 8 and 7 when this began. First response was sort of the broader societal fear, like, hey, is everything really going to be okay? Should we all be running around getting guns? And once that subsides, and yes, the food's still coming to Target and Giant, and everything's going to be okay, then it became the more serious long-term question, budgetary concerns at the state level, what this was going to do. How many of my constituents are going to be unemployed? We're going to wind up facing eviction. What sort of impact would this have on people's mental state, the isolation? What sort of education would kids in Allentown get versus kids in the Parkland School District? All those issues started bouncing around. And I saw it not only in my own personal life. My wife is a teacher in Allentown, and it took them like 40 days to get up and running because they had so many internet and technology problems, twice as long as anywhere else did. Unfortunately, the broadest takeaway from COVID has been that things are not only as bad as we thought they were in society in terms of the gap between people who have and people who don't, they're actually worse. And in no place is that more clear than what happened with Allentown and Parkland. I mean, Parkland was up and running 2 weeks later. They had a full online digital curriculum. Allentown, it took 40 days, and you still had plenty of kids that never made it online despite the best efforts of the school district. My reaction since that time has not only been sadness for so many reasons. The obvious, of course, the death, the sickness, the lost jobs, the lost businesses, the way this should have been handled better. But also anger at all the lost memories, that all the time we all lost together. And, and then trying to figure out how we can truly come back in a better place, which I think we can. It's just going to take ages.
So how, I guess, your children, and observing them, what were you noticing?
I got lucky. My kids handled it much better than I would have thought. Again, it's not like they saw their friends for 6 months. We had, the concept of a Zoom play date was so absurd, but here we were doing Zoom play dates. But I'm lucky. Like, we all really, one of the hidden blessings of COVID for me was that I was able to spend time with my kids. and I will always cherish that time that we had together. That sort of extra time as I worked from home. But they did better than I would have anticipated. They really did. But again, I was fortunate. I don't know how or why, but by and large, they did okay.
And how has your contact with your extended family been?
Again, so not again, but my parents live in Whitehall, so they're right here. And you know, in the past 6 months, they have not been in our house once. We've had porch dates. We all sit on the front porch, you know, 6 feet apart like a bunch of idiots. A lot of that. They would go. My poor parents.
Got to visually see them, right?
Yeah. Well, they live nearby, so we're able to do that a couple times a week, and obviously talk on the phone and all that. But extended family beyond that, obviously, haven't really seen. You know, nobody's going to drive a few hours to sit on my porch, and I don't blame them one bit.
No, I understand that completely. It was just in New York State. Actually, I've been in New York State twice this summer, and they are so serious and conscientious of mask wearing. There are hand washing stations like every couple of feet. So when I come back to Pennsylvania, I'm kind of like a little like culture shocked, because up there, you know, we were like climbing Mount Hohenberg and we had our masks, you know, but here, no.
Yep. We're lucky. Most people in the Valley have been pretty good about it. I will say it's really embarrassing when I go to Harrisburg. Every House Democrat, it's not an exaggeration, every Democrat has a mask on the floor of the House. The speaker has asked people, the Republican speaker has asked people to wear masks. He said it's a policy. And maybe a little more than half of House Republicans are wearing masks. Like, it's just embarrassing. It's disgraceful.
So then your own personal response, it seems it's very interesting, because I was kind of asking about, like, within your family, like, what was the feeling? And then and I get it, you didn't want to share too deeply, but you kind of went to the broader concerns instead of, like, you know, your own personal, like, well, I got to tell you, Liz, I was a little freaked.
Yeah. Oh, I was totally freaked, especially at the beginning. The first couple of weeks was the first few weeks was the most stressed out period of my entire life. Mainly because the work here exploded. You know, all of us, myself and my employees, we were all working from home, and dealing with the most random, bizarre questions and unemployment questions, this, that, and the other thing. I have a terrible habit when I'm stressed or nervous. I will curl my hair, I twirl it like a little schoolgirl, and I will start to yank it. And my wife finally is like, "You're done." And she starts throwing hats over my head while I'm sitting at my desk working so that I didn't tear my hair out, literally. I mean, that's my personal response. That was the stress reaction. That was out of my mind. But
wow. All right.
Thankfully, it's not as bad anymore.
Well, and like during the COVID, what I was noticing as I was doing telehealth, et cetera, and so forth is, you know, for a lot of people who were okay with their unemployment or whatever, and there was a real generosity, like hairdressers, et cetera, and so forth. Their clientele was sending them donations or leaving things on their front porch, which is
so
great.
A lot of good.
But then, and so during the time of the bubble, people were able to focus more therapeutically. Then yellow came. And once we turned yellow, I saw a real spike in anxiety, a real spike, because, you know, some of those things that were kind of blocked because of the quarantine were now coming back. And by the time we hit green, like, things had started to get really, I was getting phone calls at midnight. It was getting just really stressful for everyone, myself included. I was seeing people around the clock, because I feel if you've made a phone call, I'm going to answer. So that's just how I work. So I didn't know if you noticed anything similar with regards to, like, your work or your experience.
Unemployment, and, you know, on a work level, the unemployment stuff started getting worse around that time because people had gone so long without money, and it was causing more and more of a problem as there were hitches in the unemployment system. But that is only, as I knock on wood here, only recently I feel like has my phone not ringing off the hook. It's still ringing, but the ringing has changed. Like, I've been in my office physically for a few hours today. I only had one unemployment call so far. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
So, you know, from my perspective, things have gotten better. I don't know how much better they're going to get, though, but yeah.
Okay. Has your office done any, I know in talking to Senator Brown's office, they were calling constituents just to check in a little bit. Has your office implemented any sort of program like that?
God bless them that they had time for it. No, they have more staff than we do. No,
I'm just asking.
Yeah, no, but we've been digging out. Like it's just been a matter of triage. So no, we haven't been able to do that. I wish we could.
Right. Even PBS has been doing a form of that.
That's great.
Yeah, they're calling their memberships and just checking in with them.
Oh, good for them.
And of course, how are you really is the new catchphrase, right? And I think it's really important that we do check in with each other that way, and your neighbors, you're still a part of the same community, right?
Absolutely. Well, and thankfully, I've got a good support network of other House Rep colleagues of mine, and we've been like we've got a million different text threads, and we're all like, hey, how you doing? Hey, how you doing? So that's been helpful on a personal level. We're all kibitzing about the various challenges all of us are having.
Can I ask, and then we're going to kind of tie this up, but I know you mentioned about having food delivered, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what has your experience been with regards to like going out to places, whether it's for like a meal, whether it's for takeout, whether it's for like, how have you and your family been managing it along those lines?
We do takeout. We've barely gone out to any restaurants, and when we have, it's been outdoors. I mean, the evidence seems to be pretty clear. It seems to be more in bars than restaurants, but I have tried. I haven't been not 100%, but I've tried to avoid eating indoors when I can, just because there seems to be some evidence that indicates that that's where transmission can be a problem. What I have done though is ramped up the takeout. That's something. If we're at the Utter Bar in Allentown at least once a week, and they know me by sight, even with my mask on. But that's how we've tried to handle it. Again, not 100%. Certainly times that I've gone out to restaurants, and I think as long as you're cautious, that's an appropriate thing to do. But there's a degree of paranoia there, and rightfully so, I think.
So you have been so like open and answered all the questions, so that's fantastic. Honesty is always a good way to start a relationship, right?
Yeah.
You've talked about several strategies that you have incorporated to help manage your experiences with one, COVID, two, mental health issues in general. One is you write, so that's interesting. Are your books
That's
available?
helped save me. Sorry?
Are your books available?
One of them is, yeah. Yeah, and there's more coming.
And what's the one that is?
The one that is a book. It's called Redemption. I can't get too much into it, but that is the name of it. Yeah.
Oh, you haven't published it?
No. I have published it, but I'm sitting in my government office right now, so I can. I feel like I can give you.
Got it.
Exactly.
Yeah, understood. If I can, and this I'll probably edit out. I was literally sitting in an office with a patient that was going through some really difficult things, and I remember turning to this person and saying, "This is your chance for redemption," like real passionately, right?
Yeah.
And the phone rang. It was the craziest thing, and it said Redemption Center.
No.
I swear. I was like, wow, that was crazy.
Yep.
But anyway, okay. So you talked about writing, and you've also talked about the idea of physical activity.
Definitely.
Staying in contact with colleagues via text messaging or Zoom and phone calls.
Yep.
Committing to your personal family as best you can with regards to visiting and staying in contact as well.
Yep, absolutely.
And you continue to visit your therapist as needed. How frequently have you been doing that, if I can ask?
Right now, I don't mind. I have been, yeah. Especially at the moment, I've seen him a few weeks in a row. Unfortunately, about 2 months ago, I jumped in a pool, I landed funny, and I've developed terrible tinnitus in my ear, which has just been really not fun. So I've definitely been talking. There's no cure for it. Seems to be in a better position, but I've definitely been talking with my therapist on how to manage it, because that's the only way you can deal with tinnitus. You can't cure it. You can manage it, though.
So you're getting ringing?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's not fun. It's not fun. It's not a good experience. Do not recommend.
And okay, so you've been seeing him consistently for the last several weeks, it sounds like. But otherwise, it's kind of and you know what? It is important that therapists make themselves obsolete. I mean, the idea being that
weird, but yes. Yeah.
Don't form a different dependency, right?
Yeah.
You do it, you get over the major parts of it, you kind of go on, see how things go, and guess what? You get to come back. And a lot of my patients know that. They will call me after years and be like, "Hey, Liz," and I always give them the time. Many times I just do a quick phone thing with them. I don't even charge. I'm just like, okay, great.
Have you like needing a tune-up?
Right, right. You know, in fact, while I was in Lake Placid, I think I took at least 4 calls.
Yeah.
One was like a call from like a guy I saw 3 years ago. But you know what? I gave him the time. I said, you know, if you want to, you're welcome to come back. If not, hope everything works out. Boom, moved on with my day.
Yeah.
And I guess if you were to offer one piece of advice, supportive advice, to anybody who might watch this, what would that be? What do you think would be a really important piece?
Most important thing is, one, find help, because the help is out there. It is hard and it can be a challenge, but there are resources and ways that you can see somebody who can help you get through whatever you're experiencing it. And two, don't be ashamed or embarrassed. You're not the only one. Whatever you're feeling, I guarantee you are so far from the first, and there are people who have gotten through worse, and that can be you too. Those are the 2 best pieces of advice I can think of.
Yeah. And I don't know if you've checked out the National Alliance for the Mental Illness page. They have like a lot of free hotlines, I may add,
Definitely.
that you can call and reach out to, as well as being able to text 741-741, which is the suicide awareness texting line.
Yep.
And I will look forward to seeing you on, what is it, Thursday?
Thursday, I want to say, yeah.
Okay, on Thursday. Right. I'm excited. I think it's great, you know, that we have somebody so passionate and open and out front about this issue and encouraging people, like, honestly, you're fine. Just go get the help. And
it's like diabetes. You got this. Absolutely. I said it's like diabetes. It's a chronic condition. You got this.
That was so perfect, actually. Thank you so much for saying that. You know, I'll say you wear glasses, you know, you get diabetes, whatever.
Yeah.
You know, I want mental health to sound like I had a cold. I am taking a cold capsule. Boom, I'm back at work.
You're good.
So that kind of easiness with it.
Absolutely.
You know, State Representative Michael Schlossberg, I am so grateful that you came on Real People No Mask Required. I look forward to seeing you on Thursday, and congratulations and good luck in the polls.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, and thanks for that too.
All right, have a great one.
Thank you for listening to Real People No Mask Required. Real stories, real life events, real people. For more information, visit lizyounger.com. That's lizyounger.com.